In a remote village in eastern Congo, women were raped and men were killed by marauding armed militiamen. This while United Nations troops were just up the road. This is not the first time UN peacekeeping forces have been in countries where civilians were being killed. 1994, the Rwanda genocide. 1995, the massacre of Muslims in Srebrenica, Bosnia. And the ongoing killing of innocents in the Darfur region of Sudan. If UN troops were in these countries at the time of these atrocities, why didn't they do something? Mark Lagon is with Georgetown University.
The problem often is when the UN Security Council passes a resolution setting the parameters for what a peacekeeping mission can do, that it's vague or too limiting, and they can't do the job.
The UN peacekeepers in Rwanda and Srebrenica were under extreme restrictions when it came to the use of force.
They were essentially to shoot only when shot upon.
It was a frustrated Canadian general who was in charge of the UN troops in Rwanda in 1994.
General Romeo Dallaire in Rwanda, who was begging for the opportunity to stop the slaughter that led to 800,000 Rwandans dying.
And Srebrenica was actually designated a UN safe haven when Bosnian Serb militiamen killed thousands of innocent Muslim men and boys in 1995. UN peacekeepers have been sent to trouble spots ever since the Cold War, with a lot of success. Kashmir, Lebanon, Cambodia, East Timor, and Nepal, just to name a few. John Norris is with the Center for American Progress.
We have seen the UN play a really vital role in helping manage transitions that could have been much worse and much bloodier.
But the fighting was mostly over in these transitional places when United Nations troops got involved. This was not the case in Somalia in 1993. The fighting was not over when a U.S.-led UN military mission failed. 18 U.S. troops were killed in the capital, Mogadishu. Brett Schaefer is with the Heritage Foundation.
There was a general understanding at that point that the United Nations is not a war-making or a peace-enforcing institution. It doesn't really perform that task very well, and so there was a dramatic drawback in UN peacekeeping following Somalia.
The lesson that was learned by the UN was that you shouldn't engage in these kinds of peacekeeping operations, and that produced a worse result. It allowed Bosnia and Rwanda to unfold the way they did.
Many analysts say the result of the Somalia mission still influences the Security Council as far as sending enough peacekeepers to places like eastern Congo and Darfur.
When you take a look at Darfur, you're talking about an enormous area. You're talking about, I think about 15,000 troops on the ground in Darfur. They're fundamentally incapable of really protecting civilians in that area. When you take a look at Congo, again, you have about 20,000 troops on the ground in Congo, an enormous area, very difficult terrain. They're incapable of protecting the civilians in that area.
When the UN doesn't work is when member states rather cynically vote to put in place a peacekeeping operation, but don't give it the resources it needs to be effective.
They're there because the international community says we need to do something about it. And to make themselves feel better about it, they send a UN peacekeeping operation there.
The success or failure of UN peacekeeping missions depends on whether the troops in the blue helmets are supposed to keep the peace or make the peace, according to Mark Lagon.
Best case scenario for a UN peace operation working is you've got some stability in a former civil war, a former war, but there are a lot of complicated things that you need to do in terms of economic development, humanitarian relief, creating government institutions. When you want to have an impact of a military force to make peace, it's best to turn to an alliance like NATO.
Success or failure of UN peacekeeping missions may often depend on what happens here, well before troops' boots hit the ground. Why? Now you know. I'm Todd Grosshans.